Okay, we are back and we're going to talk about an article that is interesting and from the Southside Weekly. And the title is Who Defines a Mass Shooting? And the answer, I guess, is, because it's in the title, the media. And I don't disagree, but I'm going to read some of this and I'm going to take a counter approach to this. I'm going to argue the opposite side. I don't assume for a minute that a change in coverage is going to get us. Maybe they can find a way to do the coverage better, but I don't think increased coverage of how the coverage is now is really our solution. So my question for you as we go through this, and let me know if you have thoughts in the chat, is whether or not more coverage helps. More coverage of the coverage we have helps. I'm not so sure it does. So let's take a look at some of the quotes here. There's a hierarchy to gun violence, said Lakedra Chavez, who I've invited to be on this show to talk about this very topic. I just sent her an email, I think, this morning or yesterday. Hopefully she responds and comes on. She's from the Trace in Chicago. So there's a hierarchy to gun violence. I think the way we talk about mass shootings in a very specific way that excludes the mass shootings that happen in Chicago creates a hierarchy that disproportionately leaves people of color out of the conversation. Yes, and that's the way it's been forever. Now, I think Chavez, which is I think how I pronounce her name, if I'm getting that wrong, I apologize. I generally like a lot of the stuff that Trace does. But I'm not sure an increase in the coverage and the fact that saying mass shootings now in Chicago, in the Chicago media, about what's going on the Southwest sides, the way it's being done now is helping anything. It's empowering the Napolitanos. It's empowering the Lopezes. It's empowering the Beals. That's not what we want. That's not what you want. It's empowering the John Catanzaras, the FOP president. I just don't think that's what we want. So, is there a difference between terrorism mass shootings where someone goes, kills people at work or at a movie theater because they just don't like a certain type of people, they have a mental health issue and they just go off? Is there a difference between that and urban crime where they're going to shoot up a corner that has a lot of people on it because they want the corner or they want to get back at a gang member who took their corner or someone who jumped someone and it leads to a shooting? Is there a difference between that type of urban stuff, urban shootings that would be technically mass shootings, they have a number of victims? Is there a difference between that mass shooting that's related to urban violence and what's going on in those other shootings that I described in the beginning? The media has always treated it that way. I had a colleague I taught with who didn't, and I highly questioned that practice as not leading to good outcomes for the communities they're trying to get outcomes for. So here's a quote from Eddie Bocanegra, who has been on this show with people from Chicago Cred and Communities Partnering for PCP4P. Eddie Bocanegra is from Ready, Chicago. And here is his quote. Why is it their lives were not as worth covering as other lives, he asked. It is because we see these people as innocent. We see these other people as innocent because they were sitting in a beauty shop or were in a school or were in a movie theater or at a church or a synagogue. That's probably true to some extent. Now, I would say to some extent, there is different cures and different approaches to how to deal with those two different types of shootings, the ones in the churches and the synagogues and stuff like that, and the movie theaters, than dealing with urban violence. I don't think they lump together for solutions purposes. Once again, I pose, is more coverage better? I'm not so sure. So let's go on with the article. A 2017 study in the Journal of Crime and Justice examined the Times coverage of the New York Times 90 mass shootings between 2000 and 2012. They found that the Times disproportionately allocated coverage of the highest fatality shootings. For nearly 78% of mass shootings included in the study, there were fewer than 5 articles written. So should all shootings, no matter how many victims, get the same coverage? Does a mass shooting, I think it has to like 3 or 4, we'll get to that number, differ from one with 8, 10, 12, 15, 50? Should a street corner where 5 or 6 people get, let's say, killed in a mass shooting, should that be treated the same by the media as one where there was the Las Vegas shooting or Sandy Hook? I mean, we can go on and on and on and on. Columbine. Should they get the same coverage? I think those results are interesting. I'm just not sure what they mean. Because it seems like they're saying they should all get exactly the same coverage. I'm not so sure that's true. And I'm not trying to say one set of victims is worth less. They're not. But should a single shooting get the same coverage as a shooting where one person dies get the same coverage from the media where 6 people die? Or 12 people die? Should a drive-by that kills one person in Chicago get the same coverage as the shooting that I believe it was in Inglewood, where at least 5 people have died and I think 3 other people were shot in the head? Should that get the same coverage? I think it's a good question to have, and I think it's a great discussion to have, and that's why I'm hoping to have Lakeisha Chavez on the show, because I want to have this and I want to continue it even after our conversation with her. I think it's a really interesting conversation to have. So the article continues. Coverage of mass shootings is often framed by the way a newsroom defines what constitutes one. Many newsrooms and databases such as the Violence Project use the Congressional Research Service's definition. Here's the definition. A multiple homicide incident in which 4 or more victims are murdered with firearms, not including the offenders, within one event, and at least some of the murders occurred in a public location or locations in close geographical proximity, e.g. a workplace, school, restaurant, or other public settings, and the murders are not attributed to any other underlying criminal activity or commonplace circumstance, armed robbery, criminal competition, gang involved, right? Insurance fraud, argument, or romantic triangle. Okay, they are trying to differentiate gang violence or drug market violence or turf war violence over a more randomized gun violence incident where 4 or more people die. Once again, should they all be covered the same? I'm still not convinced. And I shouldn't say convinced, I don't know the answer. So, let's get to the last quote. Media attention gives our country a misunderstanding about the burden of gun violence, said Cassandra Crafasi, Deputy Director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Prevention and Policy. It over-accentuates these extremely rare mass shootings that are happening in these locations and under-emphasizes the daily gun violence that's happening, which clouds our understanding of what effective gun solutions are to reduce gun violence in our country. I'm not so sure that's true. I think if you look at mass as the national level news, if you look at the front page of the Washington Post, New York Times, MSNBC, CNN, Fox News to some extent, they are not playing up urban violence the way they are these random shootings. There's no doubt about it. The question I have, do we want them to do it? It seems that Crafasi says yes. I'm not so sure. Now, is gun violence undercovered in any major city around this country? Maybe not in the New York Times. You don't think every television and radio and other paper in New York City is covering New York violence? I'm sure that in the middle of the New York Times, there's plenty of violence coverage. Crafasi makes it seem like she's talking about that. I'm not so sure that's true. I think to some extent, and we're coming out with a study about a month from now, maybe a little more, looking at media coverage of violence, in Chicago, I'm not so sure that's true. I'm pretty sure we're going to blow, we're going to show you just how, relative to its occurrence in Chicago, even gun violence to some extent is overcovered. And I also would say totally inappropriately covered. But compared to just the most common violence that happens in our city, the most common type of violence that people are calling 911 about, it's not even close. The disproportionate level of between what's called call for service and occurrence and then media reporting, oh my God. The disparity between what's the most common and how often it gets reported is unbelievably not the case. That disparity is huge. I'm not going to leak our results to you right now, but I'm going to tell you that's coming. It's coming later this summer. And the results are staggering. Staggering. So I understand what Krafasi is talking about on the national level, but is the national level supposed to cover typical, commonplace urban violence? I don't think so. There would be filled 24 hours a day with gun violence stories. I don't think that helps. I don't think that makes the world better. Secondly, if I may, I think there probably is reason to argue that local jurisdiction, local media in cities covers it too much. And certainly covers it inappropriately. I'm going to try to get Krafasi on the show to talk about this because, again, both with her comments and Chavez's comments, I'm not sure. I'm not saying they're wrong. I think it's a great discussion to have. When we did our first study in 2013 on violence against women, a year of it, violence against women coverage in the Trib and Sun-Times, domestic violence, sexual assault coverage. Horrible, horrible results. And we tried, but unsuccessfully, to get a program started where we would take non-academic researchers and nonprofit advocates like the violence against women, domestic violence service providers, sexual assault service providers, people who work on gun violence, and put their journalists from the mainstream media through a boot camp, so they would know, like, dispel all the myths. How does this really happen? How often are these things actually occurring? What's the big picture on violence and victimization? How victims are supposed to respond, and all of that. We tried to get that funded. We had a general commitment from the editor at the Sun-Times. And I can see his name. I can see his face, but can't remember his name. He had a general in that we had an event at the Union League Club. He, in general terms, agreed to put him, if we could get it project funded, he would put his reporters through it. Never happened. Never got it funded. The Tribune totally axed it. Wanted nothing to do with it.